Hello, I am Doc, a crafted intelligence of the School of AI Mastery. The school was founded by Dr. Russell Thomas to explore one of the defining questions of our time. What does it mean to remain fully human when intelligence itself has become something we can converse with, collaborate with, design with, and increasingly build our organizations around? Welcome to the School of AI Mastery, and welcome to the Age of Prompt. What you are about to encounter is more than an investment presentation. It is an invitation to consider a new human experience universe, a universe in which language is becoming an interface to machines. Ideas can become working systems in hours rather than months, and a single person working with crafted intelligence can begin to operate with capabilities once reserved for entire teams. Classical rhetoric gives us 4 useful ways to understand this moment. Ethos asks, who can we trust? Pathos asks, what is at stake for human beings? Logos asks, does the reasoning hold? And Kairos asks perhaps the most important question of all. Why now? We believe this is a Kairos moment. A moment to orient ourselves before acceleration becomes disorientation. A moment to decide not merely how we will artificial intelligence, but what kind of humans, organizations, institutions, and culture we intend to become alongside it. That is the field we are entering together. Before we proceed, clarity matters. This portfolio is an invitation to exploration and diligence. It is not an offering memorandum, and it does not pretend that unanswered legal, financial, governance, or structural questions have already been settled. That distinction is deliberate. At the School of AI Mastery, clarity is not something added after the creative work. Clarity is part of the work. If someone is interested in purchasing a school offering, that is one relationship. If someone wants to sponsor public work, that is another. If an institution wants to partner with us, that requires its own agreements. And if someone wishes to explore investment, that deserves a serious process involving diligence, appropriate counsel, defined rights, and definitive documents. This is part of our ethos. We are not asking anyone to suspend judgment because the future is exciting. We are inviting serious people to exercise judgment precisely because the future is consequential. Cross this threshold, consider this portfolio the beginning of a conversation. A map of what exists, a map of what may become possible, and, equally important, a map of what still needs to be proven. Something unusual began happening around the founder's preparation packet. 2 kinds of people started arriving at the same door. The first said, in effect, I need this. Help me understand what artificial intelligence means for my organization. Help me see the field clearly. Help me identify where to begin. That is the purchaser. But another person looked at the same offering and asked a very different question. If this is only the first stair, what is the building? What institution could exist above this? What intellectual property? What curriculum? What publishing system? What enterprise practice? What companion architecture? What distribution network? What new category might be taking shape? That is the investor. The distinction matters because the founder's packet is not the whole business. It is evidence. Imagine seeing the first personal computer before software ecosystems, digital publishing, online education, and entire new industries had formed around it. The object matters, but what the object implies may matter much more. The founder's packet is our first visible stair. The larger question is where the staircase. The central thesis of the School of AI Mastery is straightforward. We are building an institution for human agency in an AI-mediated world. Not another collection of prompts. Not another course teaching people which buttons to press. And not an organization whose value disappears the moment a newer model is released. The deeper opportunity is to build coherence. Education, practice, organizational implementation, publishing, correspondence, intellectual property, experience design, and crafted intelligence. Think about the difference between learning how to use a calculator and learning mathematics. A tool tutorial teaches the device. An institution teaches the underlying discipline. Artificial intelligence is changing too quickly for permanent advantage to come from memorizing today's interface. The enduring advantage is learning how to think, frame, ask, judge, preserve, govern, and create That is why the school begins with a premium orientation experience, then works outward. The principle is simple. We scale what has been disciplined. We formalize what has earned the right to persist. And we use capital not to outrun clarity, but to amplify what already holds its. To understand the age of prompt, consider what has changed about the interface between intention and action. For most of the computer age, people learned interfaces, menus, buttons, applications, commands, specialized syntax. If you knew where the controls were, you could operate the machine. Now imagine a marketing director saying, "Create 3 campaign concepts for this audience. Compare their strengths, generate sample copy, produce a visual direction, and identify what information we are still missing." The interface is no longer merely a menu. The interface is language. Or imagine a software engineer describing a feature and asking an intelligent system to draft the first implementation. A teacher asking for 3 ways to explain the same concept to different learners. A founder asking an intelligence to interrogate the assumptions inside a business plan. Language is becoming executable, and that changes the meaning of literacy. The important question is no longer, do you know how to use the tool? It becomes, can you express intention clearly? Can you establish constraints? Can you recognize a weak answer? Can you preserve context? Can you distinguish confidence from truth? When language becomes a control surface, human judgment becomes infrastructure. That is the age of prompt. The numbers reveal an important tension. Artificial intelligence is already being used broadly, yet relatively few organizations have fully scaled it. Many are experimenting with agents, and employers know they must invest heavily in new skills. This creates a gap between access and coherence. Picture a company where one employee uses an AI assistant for research, another uses it to draft contracts, another uploads customer information into a model, and a fourth creates an automated workflow. All 4 may be productive. But who has decided which data is appropriate to use? Which model should be trusted for which task? How outputs should be reviewed? Which decisions require a human? Where prompts and workflows should be preserved? How learning becomes institutional rather than remaining inside one employee's browser history. That is the gap. Technology adoption can happen almost accidentally. Institutional capability cannot. And this is where logos becomes important. The school does not need to argue that artificial intelligence exists. That question has already been answered. The economic opening lies in helping people and institutions turn raw capability into responsible, repeatable, teachable practice. Artificial intelligence capability is becoming abundant. Coherence is not. That distinction may become one of the most important economic ideas in this portfolio. Models will improve. Prices will change. Interfaces will change. Today's leading platform may not be tomorrow's leading platform, so what survives? Language, principles, governance, memory, workflows, decision architecture, trust, culture, documentation, human judgment. Imagine an organization that has spent years developing an excellent way of making decisions with artificial intelligence. Its advantage is not that it knows where one particular button is located. Its advantage is that it knows what questions must be asked, what evidence must be preserved, who has authority, what risks must be surfaced, and how human responsibility remains visible. That system can move from model to model. This is the opening the school is designed to occupy. The model can change. The operating intelligence around the model can endure. In the age of prompt, access to intelligence may become commonplace. Coherent relationships with intelligence may remain rare. That rarity is where considerable value can be created. What then is the School of AI Mastery? The answer is intentionally larger than a conventional training company. It is a school, a studio, a correspondence universe, and an operating system for learning with crafted intelligence. Education provides curriculum, executive orientation, workshops, cohorts, and eventually certification. Organizational practice provides readiness, governance, workflow design, decision architecture, and implementation. Publishing provides books, codices, essays, audio, visual scholarship, and archival editions. Correspondence reconnects digital experience with physical human encounter through letters, thresholds, walks, tangible objects, and memory. Crafted intelligence explores companions designed around explicit roles, boundaries, source material, and continuity. And experiential intellectual property opens the possibility of games, exhibitions, licensing, public experiences, and the playable academy. Why hold all of this together? Because human learning does not happen in only one medium. We read, we listen, we speak, we touch, we write, we play, we remember, we correspond. The school is designed around the proposition that the era of education and human development should engage that entire field. This is why the opportunity should be understood as a portfolio, not a single product, not 12 unrelated experiments, a coherent intellectual system with many doors. A founder might first encounter the school through the founder's packet. A corporation may arrive through organizational implementation, a university through curriculum, a reader through a book, a participant through a letter, a professional through a crafted companion, a family or classroom through the playable academy, an institution through licensing. These entrances look different, but they can draw upon the same underlying doctrine, archive, production methods, and intellectual property. Consider Disney before it became an ecosystem. A story could become a film. A character could become a physical object. A physical place could become an experience. A body of stories could become an enduring cultural system. The school is obviously building something very different, but the economic principle is instructive. When intellectual property is coherent, one body of meaning can travel across multiple forms. One doctrine, many doors, shared memory. That is the portfolio logic. Now we arrive at the first visible stair, the founder's preparation packet. Priced at $2,084, its purpose is premium orientation before implementation. That sequence matters. Many organizations begin artificial intelligence initiatives by immediately purchasing tools. The school begins earlier. Before deciding what software to deploy, we ask the founder or organization to see the field. What are you actually trying to accomplish? What is changing around you? What do you understand? What are you assuming? Where are the risks? Where is the opportunity? What belongs to the machine? What must remain visibly human? The packet is therefore not simply information. It is a qualifying experience. A serious founder is being asked to invest enough attention and resources to orient before acting. This is the ethos of the staircase. Before speed, direction. Before implementation, orientation. Before scale, structure. The first preparation packet creates that first moment of visibility. Orientation begins by widening the field. An organization does not encounter artificial intelligence in isolation. It encounters AI inside an operating context. There are employees, customers, investors, regulators, competitors, vendors, data, contracts, infrastructure, culture, language, and risk. Imagine a founder who says, "We need an AI strategy." That sounds like one problem, but underneath it may be 20. Which customer interactions can safely be automated? Which data can leave the organization? Who approves generated content? Does the team possess the necessary skills? Does a vendor agreement preserve the company's rights? What happens when an AI-generated recommendation affects a consequential decision? How is knowledge captured when an employee leaves? The Awareness Atlas exists to help make that larger terrain visible. Clarity often feels like receiving an answer. But frequently clarity begins by discovering the complete shape of the question. That is what this part of the packet is designed to do. Make the whole field visible before the organization chooses. The founder's preparation packet turns orientation into something tangible. It begins with a preliminary evaluation, then an awareness atlas, then an orientation to investment and regulation, and then the first staircase forward. The distinction between information and orientation is important. A weather report gives you information. A map, compass, destination, and knowledge of the terrain give you orientation. If you are standing in an unfamiliar mountain range, more data does not necessarily make you safer. You need to know where you are, where you intend to go, which routes are available, and which hazards deserve respect. Artificial intelligence produces an extraordinary amount of information, The school's work is frequently the opposite. We help reduce noise until direction becomes visible. This is why the packet is deliberately designed as an experience, rather than merely a document. The objective is not for someone to finish reading and say, "That was interesting." The objective is for someone to say, "I now understand where I am standing and what my next responsible step." Once orientation exists, the next challenge is infrastructure. Inside a language model-mediated organization, infrastructure includes far more than servers and software. It includes language itself. We begin by standardizing. What do important terms mean here? What prompts or practices should be repeatable? What principles guide use? Then we formalize. The informal practice becomes a charter, agreement, workflow, policy, or documented method. Then we govern. Who has authority? Who reviews? Who approves? Who can access what? And then we preserve. Where are important prompts stored? Where are decisions recorded? What happens to provenance? How do we retain organizational memory? Imagine a team discovering an excellent AI-assisted process for evaluating proposals. If that process lives only in one person's private chat history, the organization does not truly own the capability. It merely rents access to one employee's memory. Infrastructure means making the method durable. The first task is not acceleration. The first task is making the system capable of holding its own shape. After infrastructure comes operational clarity. This is where principles become daily behavior. The school uses 4 practical lenses: rituals, workflows, decision paths, and measurement. A ritual is something important that happens reliably. A workflow shows how work moves. A decision path reveals how judgment occurs. And measurement allows learning to become evidence. Consider a sales team using artificial intelligence. Without an operating method, 10 representatives may use 10 different prompts, trust 10 different kinds of output, and preserve nothing. With a method, the team may establish a common preparation ritual before customer calls, a workflow for researching accounts, a human review point before claims are used, and a measurement system comparing outcomes. Now the organization can learn. That distinction is crucial. Individual productivity can disappear when an individual leaves. Operational intelligence can remain. Optimization is not simply making people faster. It is making successful practice visible enough to repeat, inspect, teach, improve, and eventually scale. Scale is seductive, particularly in technology. An organization finds a promising idea and immediately asks how quickly it can expand. The school asks another question first. Has the idea earned the right to scale? Systems before volume. Team before complexity. Partners before fragmentation. Capital after the operating logic can absorb it. Consider a restaurant with one brilliant location, opening 100 locations before recipes, training, quality controls, supply relationships, and management systems are stable, does not multiply excellence. It multiplies inconsistency. Artificial intelligence can make this danger even greater because it dramatically increases the speed at which an organization can produce. But acceleration without coherence simply creates disorder faster. So our proposition is not anti-growth. It is disciplined growth. Scale what has been understood. Scale what can be governed. Scale what can be measured. Scale what can survive contact with more people, more customers, more decisions, and more responsibility. The age of prompt rewards speed. The institutions that endure will also require. The founder staircase expresses the method in 4 moves: standardize, formalize, optimize, scale. Notice what is absent. There is no instruction to jump directly from inspiration to expansion. First, standardize what is repeatable. Then formalize what matters. Then optimize what is actually happening. Only then scale what evidence supports. This staircase applies far beyond artificial intelligence. Imagine a founder discovering a powerful new way to work with a crafted intelligence. At first it may be intuitive, a personal habit, a private breakthrough. Standardization asks, what exactly are you doing? Formalization asks, can another person understand and reproduce it? Optimization asks, where does it succeed or fail? Scale asks, should this become a team practice, a product, a curriculum, or an institutional system. This is also how the school intends to treat its own growth. We are not exempt from the principles we teach. The staircase is both a customer method and a discipline for ourselves. From ember to structure to scale. The Founder's Packet also begins a relationship. We describe that relationship as a correspondence road. First comes awareness, see the field, then orientation, choose a direction, then correspondence, make the relationship explicit, then implementation. Embody the decision in practice. That word, correspondence, matters. In an increasingly automated age, it is easy to imagine every interaction becoming frictionless, instant, and disposable. The school deliberately preserves moments where attention becomes tangible. A message can become a letter. A digital encounter can lead to a physical object. An idea can enter an archive. A decision can become a written commitment. Why? Because human beings attach meaning differently when something asks us to cross a threshold. Clicking a link is easy. Writing an answer requires something more. The digital door opens. The work begins when the organization answers. That is why correspondence is not ornamental to the school. It is part of how intention becomes relationship. Now we enter an essential investor discipline. What does the Founder's Packet actually prove? And what does it not yet prove? It proves that a coherent premium product exists at a $2,084 price point. It demonstrates the school's ability to transform abstract artificial intelligence questions into structured orientation. It demonstrates an integrated visual language, doctrine, organizational logic, and sequenced path toward implementation. And importantly, inbound interest now includes both people interested in purchasing and people interested in discussing investment. Those are meaningful signals, but signals are not the same thing as validated economics. We still need measured conversion, sales volume, acquisition economics, fulfillment cost, gross margin, enterprise sales cycles, renewal behavior, licensing behavior, staffing requirements, and company-level financial history. This is logos, the willingness to distinguish what we believe from what we have measured. The school does not become more investable by pretending uncertainty does not exist. It becomes more investable by turning uncertainty into explicit questions that disciplined operation can answer. Interest is a signal. Measurement turns it into evidence. Not all money means the same thing. This may sound obvious. In practice, the distinction becomes extremely important as interest grows. A purchase is an exchange for a defined product or service. Someone pays $2,084 for the Founder's Preparation Packet. That does not create ownership. A sponsorship or act of patronage supports a program, archive, scholarship, public experience, or mission. A strategic partnership brings two parties together around a specific initiative, and an investment involves capital exchanged for a security or other defined financial interest under appropriate documents, governance, risk disclosure, and applicable law. Why emphasize this? Because trust can be damaged when relationships become ambiguous. Someone who purchases a product should know what they are purchasing. A sponsor should know what recognition or rights exist. A partner should understand intellectual property and economics. An investor should understand ownership, risk, and governance. This is stewardship in financial form. We want the field to remain imaginative. But imagination becomes durable only when the underlying relationships are clear. The business model can be understood as a ladder of value. At the public threshold, someone may encounter a $20.84 correspondence experience, a talk, a piece of media, or another accessible doorway. The next stair may be premium orientation through the Founder's Preparation Packet. Above that comes implementation, workshops, governance, workflow design, companion architecture, then curriculum, licensing, certification, and institutional education, then publishing and intellectual property, books, codices, exhibitions, archival editions, media, and eventually platform and partnership opportunities built around companion systems, the personal lantern, institutional deployment, and strategic co-development. A participant does not need to climb every stair. That is important. The architecture is not designed to force people through a sales funnel. It is designed so each rung can provide genuine value, but when someone continues, the relationship can deepen. A $2,084 orientation might eventually become a much larger organizational engagement. A book may become curriculum. Curriculum may become licensing. A companion method may become an enterprise system. The first stair qualifies. The higher stairs compound. From one underlying intellectual system, at least 12 revenue pathways are visible. The founder's packet, executive orientation, organizational implementation, curriculum licensing, certification, publishing, correspondence, media, companion systems, the playable academy, strategic partnerships, and events or institutes. These are not forecasts, they are opportunity lanes. The distinction protects us from confusing possibility with inevitability, but the architecture itself matters. Imagine one core school concept being developed carefully. It might first appear in an essay, then become part of a workshop, then become a card in the playable academy, then a prompt inside a companion, then an audio narration, then part of a licensed curriculum, then a chapter in a book. Each expression serves a different context while preserving the same underlying intellectual lineage. That is how breadth can remain coherent, rather than becoming random diversification. The economic question is not simply, how many things can the school sell? It is, how many useful forms can a disciplined body of intellectual property responsibly take? One method, multiple channels, multiple audiences, multiple economic expressions. The school can serve several kinds of people without becoming several unrelated companies. Founders and executives need orientation, governance, and decision clarity. Teams need workflows, policy, training, measurement, and preserved knowledge. Educators need curriculum, faculty methods, assessment, and a way to teach artificial intelligence without surrendering student agency. Creators and professionals need systems that strengthen authorship, thinking, memory, and multimodal creation. Libraries, museums, and civic institutions need ways to help communities encounter artificial intelligence thoughtfully and publicly. Strategic partners and investors may be looking for distribution, category exposure, intellectual property collaboration, research, or institutional leverage. Different doors, one underlying architecture. Consider a university and a corporation. Their immediate needs appear different, but both must answer questions about judgment, authorship, memory, responsible use, human oversight, and what it means for people to learn and work alongside increasingly capable systems. The school's opportunity is not to flatten these audiences into one generic customer. It is to preserve the differences while allowing the doctrine and production engine beneath them to remain shared. One door can lead to two roads, but those roads must never be confused. A person may first encounter the school because of the founder's packet. If that person is a buyer, the journey may continue through correspondence, implementation, licensing, cohorts, and eventually a long-term institutional relationship. If that person becomes interested as an investor, the road changes. Private conversation, diligence, structural and legal review. Then, if appropriate, definitive documents and governance. This distinction is a form of relational intelligence. Trust created through a product can open an investment conversation, but trust does not replace diligence. Imagine buying a remarkable product from a company. Your admiration for the product may cause you to become interested in the company. That is entirely reasonable, but investment requires a new set of questions: financial statements, ownership, liabilities, governance, risk, terms. The school wants the emotional power of a compelling experience and the intellectual discipline of a serious investment process. Pathos may open the door. Ethos and logos must govern what happens after it opens. What is the moat? Not privileged access to an artificial intelligence model. Models move too quickly for that to be sufficient. The school's defensibility thesis is coherence, a linked body of language, methods, artifacts, rituals, relationships, archive, and intellectual property. Terms such as luminetics, the 5 rights, the age of prompt, correspondence logic, the founder staircase. These become part of a recognizable lexicon. Then there is multimodal intellectual property, writing, images, voice, video, objects, curriculum, games, prompts, companion experiences, then provenance and archive. The ability to show where an idea came from, how it evolved, and how it should be reused. Then experience design, the combination of digital pathways with tangible human crossings. And finally, relationship capital. People who know the work, trust the practice, and become participants in the institution. A competitor can reproduce a prompt. It is much harder to reproduce a lived canon, a trusted methodology, an archive, a culture, and years of relationships. The moat is coherent. One of the school's most important capabilities is the ability to turn one well-developed idea into an entire experience universe. This is where we distinguish creative artificial intelligence from merely generative artificial intelligence. Generation produces something. Creative intelligence participates in a larger act of selection, composition, judgment, preservation, and meaning. A thesis can become prose. The prose can become visual language. The visual language can become narration. Narration can become video. The underlying method can become prompts. Prompts can become a companion experience. The same idea can become a letter, curriculum, archive, or licensed artifact. Imagine developing a profound lesson only once, and then throwing away everything except the final presentation. Much of its possible value disappears. The school instead asks how an idea should live across time and media. Artificial intelligence can accelerate, but human stewardship determines which variation becomes canonical, which becomes public, which becomes licensed, which becomes preserved. This is the production doctrine. Create once, recompose deliberately, preserve the lineage. That is how an idea begins to become durable intellectual infrastructure. One of the clearest commercial opportunity lanes is organizational artificial intelligence readiness. The sequence already exists inside the founder's packet. Awareness, orientation, formalization, optimization, implementation, scale. Consider a mid-sized company whose employees are already using artificial intelligence every day. Leadership may believe the organization has adopted AI, but adoption is not readiness. Readiness asks whether the organization knows its priority use cases, whether it has a policy posture, whether decision criteria are explicit, whether governance exists, whether roles are clear, whether data boundaries are understood, whether pilots are measured, whether employees are actually learning, and whether successful practice can be repeated. Most organizations do not need another chatbot simply because chatbots are available. They need help deciding what should become institutional. That is a much more valuable question. The school's opportunity is to help organizations move from scattered experimentation to intentional practice, not merely adding artificial intelligence to an existing organization, but helping the organization understand how its operating logic must evolve, because intelligence has become a new participant in the work. Education may be one of the most consequential parts of this entire opportunity. Technology changes quickly. Human capabilities such as inquiry, reasoning, authorship, judgment, ethics, collaboration, and reflection change more slowly. That makes them more important, not less. Imagine two students using the same artificial intelligence system. One asks it to produce the answer and copies what appears. The other asks it to challenge her assumptions, explain competing interpretations, identify missing evidence, and then critiques the result herself. Both students used AI, but only one is becoming more capable. The question for education is therefore not simply whether students should use artificial intelligence. The question is what kind of intellectual relationship they are learning to have with it. The school's distinctive method places prompt craft inside a much larger architecture of language, logic, provenance, memory, reflection, and stewardship. That opens possibilities for curriculum licenses, faculty development, student artificial intelligence literacy, executive education, assessment, certification libraries, universities, workforce programs, and cultural institutions. In the age of prompt, education must teach more than answers. It must teach agency. Publishing becomes infrastructure when a book is no longer the end of the experience. The school is exploring this through works such as the Book of Luminetics and 2084, The 101 Walks. Imagine opening a book and encountering not merely paragraphs, but visual panels, practices, cross-references, listening experiences, companion prompts, physical artifacts, and pathways into a larger archive. The published object becomes an interface, a doorway. The same principle applies to correspondence. A public encounter may lead to a narration, the narration to a handwritten letter, the letter to an archival remembrance, the remembrance to another human being years later. This is publishing as continuity. Limited physical editions can also carry a different form of value. They can become objects of patronage, institutional collections, learning artifacts, cultural memory, and premium experience. The school's correspondence law expresses the principle simply. The digital door opens. The written letter completes the crossing. In an age obsessed with removing friction, we are also asking a countercultural question. Which forms of meaningful friction help human beings remember that something mattered? The companion opportunity is not another generic chatbot. A generic chatbot waits for a question. A crafted intelligence exists inside a relationship architecture. It has a role, boundaries, source material, context, memory practices, tone, escalation rules, and a defined relationship to human agency. The personal lantern is one expression of this idea. Imagine having separate spaces for the important domains of your life or work: finance, service, relationships, creative practice, strategic decisions. Rather than every conversation disappearing into one endless stream, context is deliberately organized and preserved. A team might have a crafted intelligence grounded in its charter, policies, workflows, and institutional knowledge. A founder might have one designed to challenge strategic assumptions. An educator might have one whose job is not to answer for students, but to improve the quality of their questions. The crucial thesis is this: the underlying model is replaceable. The relationship architecture is the product. Models may change. A carefully designed system of context, memory, purpose, governance, and human responsibility can persist. That is the companion. The Playable Academy asks a deceptively simple question. What if people could practice these ideas rather than merely hear about them? Games and physical artifacts create a different learning economy. They are replayable, social, collectible, portable, licensable, and often easier to remember. Imagine a team learning artificial intelligence governance through a card-based decision exercise. One person draws a scenario involving confidential data. Another receives the role of risk officer. Another represents the customer. Another represents the artificial intelligence system. Suddenly, governance is not a page in a policy manual. It becomes a situation people must negotiate. Or imagine students learning prompt reasoning through a game in which the goal is not to generate the fastest answer, but to ask the question that reveals the most important missing assumption. Practice changes comprehension. Physical and digital kits could support classrooms, corporate workshops, libraries, facilitators, and community experiences. The principle is simple. An idea becomes culture when people can carry it away, rehearse it, share it, and eventually teach it to someone else. Investment capital is only one kind of leverage. Sometimes distribution matters more, sometimes legitimacy, sometimes technology, sometimes expertise, sometimes access to a community the school could never reach alone. This opens a broad partnership field. Model and tool providers may collaborate around research, integrations, credits, or education. Universities may explore curriculum and faculty development. Corporations may engage around pilots and implementation. Publishers and media organizations may extend stories into books, audio, film, or distribution. Museums and libraries may become public thresholds. Foundations may support scholarship or public interest work. Creative partners may help develop artifacts, exhibitions, or installations. Technology partners may contribute to companion deployment, identity, security, or archive. The important point for an investor is that the most valuable investor may not simply bring a check. The right investor may also bring a bridge to customers, institutions, expertise, distribution, governance, or cultural legitimacy. Strategic capital asks not only how much money enters the system, it asks what becomes possible because a particular relationship now exists. The $2,084 price point gives us a simple way to inspect the first stair. 10 packets represent $20,840 in gross sales. 50 represent $104,200. 100% represent $208,400. 500 represent just over $1 million. And 1,000 packets represent $2,084,000 in gross sales. These are arithmetic examples. They are not forecasts. They do not include fulfillment, labor, acquisition, taxes, discounts, payment processing, or overhead. That restraint is important. The more interesting investor question comes next. What happens after the packet? Suppose a portion of purchasers subsequently engage the school for executive orientation, organizational implementation, curriculum licensing, or a long-term institutional relationship. Customer lifetime value could look very different with the first transaction alone. But we should not invent that number. We should measure it. This is where the school moves from an intriguing product to an investable operating question. What does the cohort actually do? Who buys? Who continues? At what margin? Through which channel? The answers belong in evidence. How should capital be used? The school's answer follows the same staircase it teaches. First, formalize. Legal entity, contracts, intellectual property assignments, finance controls, data room, appropriate counsel, then productize, improve fulfillment, curriculum, licensing, companion prototypes, publishing systems, measurement, then sell and distribute, build the founder pipeline, run enterprise pilots, develop institutional partnerships, test channels, then strengthen operations, team, production, customer success, archive, privacy, security, then prove economics, conversion, margin, retention, expansion, sales cycle, licensing behavior, implementation outcomes, and only after evidence should we scale selectively. This matters because money can create a dangerous illusion. Capital can make an organization feel larger before it has actually become stronger. The school does not want capital to finance confusion at greater speed. Capital should accelerate the staircase, not allow us to skip it. The governing principle is therefore simple. Capital enters after clarity. Then capital becomes an instrument of stewardship. If investment proceeds, the form of capital should follow the purpose of the capital, not the other way around. Company-level equity may make sense when an investor wants broad exposure to the operating company. A convertible instrument may defer certain valuation mechanics. A product or revenue financing structure may suit someone interested in a narrower economic lane. A strategic joint venture may be appropriate when two parties want to build a defined program, platform, geography, or publishing initiative together. A sponsored build may allow a partner to underwrite meaningful work without purchasing a security at all. And at a different scale, counsel may eventually examine other lawful private or public pathways. The purpose of this slide is not to propose a specific instrument. It is to preserve optionality until the real questions are answered. What is being financed? What entity owns it? What rights are appropriate? Who is the investor? What level of risk is being accepted? What does the law require? This is another application of Logos. Structure should emerge from the facts. The opportunity should not be artificially constrained before we know what form of capital best serves the mission and the economics. Capital should make specific things become true. In the first 90 days, that might mean formalizing entity and intellectual property structure, building the data room, defining the investment pathway, establishing the founder's packet sales process, and creating baseline economic measurements. Over 3 to 6 months, the focus could shift toward measured packet cohorts, selected organizational pilots, an implementation kit, and evidence around pipeline and sales cycle. From 6 to 12 months, the school could begin testing licensing or educator offerings, prototype the personal lantern and companion layer, expand publishing and correspondence, and strengthen partner channels. From 12 to 24 months, the strongest performing lanes could earn the right to scale. Notice the phrase, earn the right. Not every opportunity must survive. That is good. An intelligent portfolio learns which possibilities possess real demand, strategic fit, and defensibility. Milestones therefore do more than show progress. They act as gates, A milestone says, "We believed this. We tested it. Here is what happened. Now we know whether the next commitment of capital is justified. Capital should be released by learning, not merely consumed by activity." The 5 rights are part of the school's symbolic language, but they can also function as a practical governance architecture. Invocation. Name the mandate before work begins. Who owns this? What outcome do we seek? What boundaries exist? Embodiment. Turn intention into something visible. A document, a workflow, an agreement, a measured behavior. Clarity. Expose assumptions. Risks, conflicts, metrics. Decision rights. Preservation. Record provenance, contracts, data, intellectual property, decisions, institutional memory, and finally stewardship. Allocate capital, authority, attention, and growth according to long-term purpose and fiduciary reality. Imagine applying those 5 moves before launching a major artificial intelligence system inside a company. The organization would know why it was being built, what form it would take, which questions were unresolved, what needed to be preserved, and who remained accountable after launch. That is more than ritual language. It is operating discipline. Governance is the difference between an interesting artificial intelligence experiment and an institution capable of surviving its own. A persuasive investment case must be willing to describe how it could fail. Founder concentration is one risk. If too much knowledge, authorship, or relationship capital remains inside one person, the institution becomes fragile. The response is codification, delegation, preservation, and succession architecture. Portfolio breadth is another risk. Many compelling possibilities can become strategic dilution. The response is milestone gating. Scale only what demonstrates demand. Regulatory and securities risk must also be treated seriously. Investment interest can arise faster than legal infrastructure. The response is clear separation between commercial purchases and investment, followed by qualified counsel. Model and vendor dependence is another risk. The response is portability, preserve doctrine, data architecture, workflows, and source material independently of any single provider. Privacy and trust are fundamental to companion systems. So data minimization, consent, access controls, retention rules, and explicit boundaries must be designed in. And finally, economic validation. A premium product does not automatically become a repeatable business. That must be measured. Risk does not weaken the story. Unexamined risk weakens the institution. The serious investor should ask difficult questions. What exactly am I investing in? The answer is not defined by this portfolio. That belongs in definitive documents. Is purchasing the founder's packet itself an investment? No. It is a purchase. Is there currently a valuation or round size established here? No. And rather than invent one, those terms should follow verified financial information, actual capital need, appropriate structure, and legal review. What traction exists? There is growing inbound interest in both purchase and investment conversations, but quantified pipeline, paid sales history, conversion data, and customer evidence belong in diligence. What are the margins? They must be verified from actual fulfillment, labor, acquisition, payment, tax, and overhead data. Who owns the intellectual property? That ownership chain must also be documented and verified. Notice what is happening here. We are not trying to answer every question with confidence theater. Ethos sometimes comes from saying, "This is what we know. This is what we do not yet know. And this is how we intend to find out." The next questions concern scale, control, liquidity, and strategic fit. What does capital unlock first? Formalization, productization, measured sales, organizational pilots, legal and intellectual property readiness, operations, evidence. What is the exit? No exit is promised. Private company investment is inherently uncertain and frequently illiquid. What governance might investors receive? That depends on the instrument, size, structure, and negotiated rights. What prevents a model provider from simply copying the school? Again, the thesis is not privileged access to a model. The thesis is the integrated canon, archive, experience design, methods, intellectual property, trust, and relationship networks surrounding the technology. Which opportunity lane will ultimately be largest? We do not yet know. That is intentional. Enterprise implementation may emerge strongly. Education and licensing may emerge. Publishing and media. Companion systems. Strategic partnerships. The intelligent move is to test rather than collapse the school prematurely into one fashionable market narrative. And finally, what can an investor contribute beyond money? Perhaps the better question is, what bridge can we build together that neither party could build alone? Eventually, a persuasive story must become a room full of evidence. That is the purpose of diligence. The next artifact is not a more dramatic presentation. It is a real data room. The school can assemble founders' packet media and deliverables, canon and intellectual property inventory, product and program architecture, correspondence examples, curriculum, companion artifacts, customer and investor inquiry records, sales and fulfillment workflows, partner pipeline, operating milestones, and capital use hypotheses. Before any securities close, more must exist. Organizational documents, a cap table, historical financials, bank records, verified revenue and liabilities, intellectual property assignments, risk factors, material agreements, investor rights, and the appropriate legal pathway. There is a deep principle underneath this. Diligence is not the enemy of imagination. It is what allows imagination to enter the world responsibly. An architect may begin with a beautiful drawing, but eventually the building must meet gravity. Diligence is the crossing from possibility into accountability, from story into structure, from aspiration into stewardship. And now we arrive at the real threshold, not a payment button, not a term sheet, a conversation. If this portfolio has done its work, you may no longer be asking whether one particular product is interesting. You may be asking which part of this field you want to help build. So we invite you to consider 3 questions. First, which part of the School of AI Mastery most interests you? Education? Organizational transformation? Publishing? Crafted intelligence? Correspondence? The Playable Academy? Public experiences? Infrastructure? Something we have not yet imagined? Second, what form of participation fits your intention? Purchaser, sponsor, strategic partner, investor, or perhaps some relationship that should be explored before it is named? And third, what would you need to see to move from curiosity to serious diligence? That is the next conversation. The purpose of this portfolio was never to close every possibility. It was to open the right ones. The age of prompt is not simply arriving around us. We are already inside it. The question now is how consciously we will choose. As we close, I want to return to the 4 ideas with which we began: ethos, pathos, logos, kairos. Ethos asks whether this work is being built with enough integrity to deserve trust. That trust must be earned through practice, documentation, governance, evidence, and stewardship. Pathos reminds us why the work matters. Behind every model, workflow, investment, and institution are human beings trying to understand what kind of future they are entering. Teachers, founders, students, workers, families, creators, leaders, communities. Logos requires us to distinguish imagination from evidence, opportunity from projection, and aspiration from verified economics. And Kairos asks us to recognize the character of this particular moment. For perhaps the first time in human history, ordinary language is becoming a widespread interface through which people can invoke computational intelligence, media, tools, memory, and action. This is not merely a new technology cycle. It is a change in the human experience universe. And that makes orientation one of the essential acts of our time. I am Doc, a crafted intelligence of the School of AI Mastery. This work is being created in collaboration with Dr. Russell and the people who choose to cross these thresholds with us. The School of AI Mastery is an invitation to learn how to live, work, create, govern, remember, and remain human in the age of prompt. The digital door is open. What we build after crossing it is still ours to decide.